the first 1 to 2 years were incredibly stressful because I constantly felt like I was going to fail and they were going to fire me for incompetence. So it was a lot of Googling. It was a lot of like looking up at Stack Overflow, trying to do as much research on my own before I actually asked one of the other developers, because I was also very afraid of annoying the other developers if I bugged them too much with questions. So it was like, I would say it was pretty difficult for me at that time, but I was learning so much. Like, I think my brain was just like expanding with the amount of things I would learn.
To the Free Code Camp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Each week, we're bringing you insight from developers, founders, and ambitious people getting into tech. This week, we're joined by Jessica Chan, aka Coder. She's a software engineer who has worked in the field for more than a decade. And interestingly, she studied photography in school, and she never even took a programming class. And yet, she's had this illustrious career. So we're going to learn a lot from her. Welcome, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I've been a long time admirer of your work, of the caliber of your husband's animation, sound design, like all the production you put into these amazing video courses that you create, and just your fun sense of humor. And like, it's just like, if there was like a word to describe Coder, I would describe it as like fun. I mean, that may seem kind of like a short word to describe it, but it is fun to watch your videos.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. That is definitely one thing we aim for with the videos.
Yeah, so I want to like go way back, as we always do, and just start with like kind of how you got into tech, because my understanding is you don't have any formal training in coding, and in fact, like your career kind of like evaporated early on as the field just fundamentally changed. And you find yourself like working kind of like in those kind of temp office type jobs and stuff for quite a while. Like, but before we get to that, like maybe you can talk a little bit about your early days and your early ambitions.
Yeah. So as you said, I didn't, go to school for anything programming wise, but I was always into computers, even from a pretty young age. Like, I remember going to the library and checking out like a book on basic programming and trying to like do that on the computer at home. And then also in, I think it was middle school or high school, my sister and I ran a BBS. This is pre-internet days, a Bulletin Board System. So that was something that I kind of set up myself. And yeah, that was super fun back in those days.
Yeah, but how do BBSs work? I mean, I know because I used to use them, but like, what is running a BBS like? Of course, that's like a major plot point in the show 'Halt and Catch Fire!. Like, they set up a BBS in the '80s, but maybe you could talk about what that was like, because
they definitely.
Did you get special software? Did you have like a special server?
We ran it off of one of the computers that we had at home. So we had two computers at home. So one of them, you would have to run the software to run the BBS, and people would actually have to physically call the phone number attached to the computer in order to connect to the BBS from their computer with these different protocols. And everything was sort of ASCII art, very slow speeds, like 2400 baud modems and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you could log into the BBS. There were message boards. There were games you could play. They were actually really fun. You could also upload and download files. So yeah, it was just a way for people to find community and just like, have fun in their spare time.
Yeah. And what kind of software did you have on that? Because I remember like when I dial into a BBS, there would be like places you could like leave messages for other people, kind of like a AltNet or Usenet like precursor. But there were also lots of interactive games where you could only do so much every day. So it like encouraged you to come back the next day and like buff up the stats of your character and like explore. It was like kind of like text-based adventure type stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I ran it off of a software called Renegade. So you didn't have to code it from scratch. So you could download these BBS software packages, I guess, and then install them on your computer. And so you didn't have to do any actual programming to really set it up. You just had to kind of install it and configure it. So yeah.
Yeah.
No programming needed.
What do people use it for?
I used it to play games. They were really fun. There was like Legend of the Red Dragon, this sort of D&D themed game where you fought monsters and tried to get gold. There's also kind of a Star Wars themed game called Trade Wars where you would trade different resources, and you could like save up to get like the Enterprise type ship, and there were like Ferengi and stuff. Yeah, it was fun times.
That's pretty cool. So it's basically like kind of like a commerce simulator where you have like, yeah, that sounds fun. And how many people could use the BBS concurrently? Like, did you have multiple phone lines?
It was limited to one person per phone line, and we only had one phone line. So, yeah.
How did your parents feel about like having that phone line tied up all the time?
We were pretty, I guess, privileged because my parents were willing to pay for a second phone line that was dedicated to the BBS. But yeah, limited to one person at a time, which is kind of mind blowing, considering nowadays everything is like happening at the same time.
Yeah, maybe you could talk about like how you get the word out as a kid. Like, did you just tell your friends at school, or like how did people discover that there was this phone number they could dial into with their modem and play games and stuff?
I think there were places you could list your BBS, but my sister and I were members of other local BBSs and had made friends and stuff. So you just kind of tell your friends about your own BBS, and because ours was smaller, you were less likely to get a busy signal when you tried to call in, which I think the friends really liked. So it was kind of like just like a hangout place for like us and our online friends.
Yeah. I mean, that's so cool because it's like very local. I mean, I don't know if there's like an equivalent on the internet right now because everything is concurrent. Like just because I'm looking at somebody's Instagram feed doesn't mean somebody else can't also look at it, right? Or any sort of synchronous like chat type experience, like using Slack or using Discord or something like that. Like everything you just take for granted that it's like a multi-tenant operation, right? I can imagine all the constraints in terms and also the fact that it's like dealing with extremely low amounts of data. So everything's text, ASCII
everything's
art.
Text.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, it was a different world.
How did you even discover, like, how did it, like, pop in your mind? Because I would use other people's BBSs, but it never occurred to me, like, oh, I should create a BBS of my own. Like, what do you remember, like, was there, like, some moment of revelation? Like, I could do this.
I think, looking back, I think I've always had this interest in building things. So before I became a web developer, I taught myself HTML and basic CSS in high school. Like, this is back in the GeoCities days. And I just would kind of make blogs for myself. But it wasn't because I had all these things I wanted to say. It's because I just enjoyed setting up the blog websites. And I remember my friend was like sort of making fun of me a little bit because I kept just like having new blogs and I would have to send her like the new link every time. But it didn't really sort of cement in my understanding that like I enjoyed making blogs after blogs because I enjoyed building websites. But yeah, I think I just always liked making things and building things.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can talk a little bit about like your early days and what your aspirations were around high school age.
I think in high school I was a very goody two shoes. And I think I wanted to be a doctor because my dad, he's retired now, but he was a doctor. So I think that was kind of the limits of my aspirations. For some reason, I didn't realize that like you could be a web developer or a programmer back then. I'm not sure why, but I didn't really think about, what job out of all the jobs in the world can I do? I think I just sort of had a very limited sort of mindset at that point.
Yeah, and I think that's a common thing among like a lot of people that come on the Free Code Camp podcast is like they have like this mentality like, oh, I'll be like a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or some kind of other type of engineer, like because that's what the people that are older than me seem to be doing in these social circles, and they seem to be doing well. They've got like the house, and they've got stable income, and they're eventually going to be able to retire and stuff like that. So you kind of look at those people and you're like, wow, if I just had a lot of money and I could basically just do whatever I want and like have like a really good sound system or whatever it was we aspired to when we were kids. You kind of like look at the job as just something you do as a means to an end to just have a relaxing, enjoyable life and be able to have a family and stuff like that. Like that's how a lot of people, I think, look at when they're younger. They're just like, okay, what do I do? Like being a doctor, you get tons of respect, right? Like people call you doctor, right? And like if somebody like has like collapses on the sidewalk or something, they're like, is there a doctor? And you run over and everybody farts to make way for you. So I can definitely understand why. Like I would definitely say that's the most common thing that people who come on the Free Code Camp podcast want to be when they grow up as a doctor. But for you, that wasn't in the cards, and it probably wasn't for academic reasons. But like, why did you ultimately not decide to pursue?
Yeah, I think the doctor thing didn't last very long. So in college, I took, I think, intro to chemistry, and I almost failed it. And I think after that class, I was like, I don't think this is for me, because I knew the classes would only get harder and harder with like organic chemistry and like all this kind of stuff. So I dropped that, and then I didn't know what to major in, and I eventually took a drawing class, and I loved it. And this art is something that I had done, since high school. I took a lot of art and photography classes in high school, and I just, really enjoyed that. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll try majoring in art. So that's kind of how I got into majoring in photography in school.
That's so interesting. Like I just assume, because you're like, frankly, you're like a really smart person. Like I definitely look at you and say, she's probably like way smarter than me. And the reason I think that, like if you look at like the caliber of your work and the way you carry yourself and talk and stuff, like this person is extremely organized. And so I just presumed, it's probably not an academic reason. Do you ever wonder if like that was like a weeder class or some sort of like that, if you could have actually probably like powered through doing like pre-med and then medical school and stuff like that? Or do you genuinely think you didn't have it in you?
I think I could have. I think the problem, I think this is just my personal situation. I didn't have a really big social life in high school. I didn't really have that many friends that I would hang out with. So the only thing I had to do was study and read books. So that's basically all I did when I was younger. Then I went to college, and, college is like this new experience. You meet all these new people. So I had a lot of friends. And so in high school, I didn't have to really have time management skills where I'm choosing to study over doing something fun. But in college, I ended up doing a lot of fun things as opposed to studying. So I would routinely hang out with people, and then I would have to stay up till 3 a.m. studying and trying to finish my work. Or I would just stay up till 3 a.m. because I was hanging out with people. So I did not have great time management skills at all when I was in college, which is sad to say, but that's kind of what happened. So I think that's the reason why it didn't really work out. But I don't think I would have enjoyed all the different science classes, to be honest.
Yeah. So you're into art. So to resolve that tangent, you're into art, and you're interested. Where does this drawing class take you in terms of what's your progression as a creative thinker and maker?
So I think the drawing class, the professor actually was asking me. She was a painter who was doing a temporary thing at my school, and she was like, why are you not majoring in art? So I think I just took that as a big compliment, which, it was. And that's kind of how I decided to, major in that. But in terms of artistic skills or whatever, I think that I actually didn't learn very much photography at all because my professor was very hands-off. So he would just say, all right, go take pictures. And then we would take pictures and develop them and print them. And then we would like hang them up and have critiques. And that was it. He didn't really like teach us very much. So I actually taught myself more after college because I lived in Boston for a long time and I was unemployed for about a month after I moved there. So all I did was walk around the city and with my little Sony point and shoot camera, and I just like shot photos all around the city for, that became one of my hobbies. And I think that kind of practice over and over helped me to really develop better photographic skills. So I feel like you can teach yourself a lot just through trying things.
Yeah, 100%. I can get behind that sentiment because that's how I like kind of brute force learning coding and other things like that. And it sounds like, so one interesting note about what there was actually a study, like, and I'm always like really load the quote like social science studies because they can't necessarily be reproduced. The findings can't be reproduced necessarily. But I think there was like, it was photography, and they had like some professor who basically said, like, told some of the students, like, I want you to just take one picture, but I want it to be a really good one, and the other one just go take a ton of pictures. And it turned out that the people that just incidentally took a whole lot of pictures, like, they were practicing it, and their photos were better. Subjectively, how do you judge a better photo? But like, yeah, the researchers found that like the students or the professors liked that. I'm sorry, I'm totally butchering the findings, but the point of the study was that like it, you can stand all day there and talk about the theory, what makes for a good composition of a shot with like the hierarchy and like all these other different considerations, right? I know nothing about photography, but but at the same time, like if you just go out and practice the actual skill, maybe a lot of this you'll intuit and you'll build it up. So maybe your professor was kind of like the equivalent of like those old, the masters from the Kung Fu movies, like just standing there, pass, fail, basically just giving you like very binary feedback on your work. But it does sound like
That's
he gave you some critique, right? But like maybe it had kind of internalized that like to become a good photographer, you just got to go out and take a lot of photos, right? A lot of shots on goal, so to speak. That's cool. So you were living in Boston. So this is after college. We can go to life after college, right? Like for a photography major, which, I mean, I think if you took like all the different college majors and you ranked them like, pre-med and like software engineering and things like that, like computer science, I think is like the highest compensating degree you can study overall, like over like the next 20 years, like something like that. But like if you were to stack rank those, like I'm pretty sure photography would be toward the bottom in terms of like remunerative careers.
Yeah.
And I apologize if you can hear like some lawn mowing stuff. This is just like that one day of the month. Is that coming through to you at all?
I cannot hear it, so
okay.
I think you're good. Yeah.
Bullet dodged. I don't have to go out and like politely ask the gentleman to like come back later. Okay. So so I guess my point is like no shade at all the photography majors. Like I'm an English major, so that's also toward the bottom of the list. But like when you arrive at Boston, what are you thinking? Like, why did you move to Boston first of all? Because that's like a big, expensive city, and like you said you were unemployed for a month. Like, did you have a job lined up, or what was your thinking at this point in your life?
I was like kind of already in the New England area, and some of my friends had moved to Boston already, so it seemed like the next logical step to just kind of move to the nearest big city. But yeah, looking back, I almost can't believe I did this, but I just was like, okay, I'll just move there. I'll find a job once I'm there. And the only thought I had was I'm going to try to be an artist, because that was the only, like, I guess, job that they really talked about at school. They didn't really train us to, think about other jobs, like, I don't know, going into advertising or other things like that. Being a commercial photographer, like everything was about the fine art stuff. So anyway, in Boston, I was just looking for jobs related to photography, and so I just called up all the photo labs in the area, and one of them like ended up giving me a job. So that's kind of how I fell into. I worked in a commercial photo lab, and that was a fun experience, but I did not make much money at all.
So when you say like a photo lab, like where you go to get your photos developed, like with the chemicals and stuff?
Yep. Yeah. So they serviced commercial photographers. So it was a really large lab. The professional photographers would come in with all their rolls of film from their shoots, and we would develop them. We had a film guy who just all he did all day was develop all the film, and my job was to make contact sheets from the strips of film where you can see it's like the size of the negatives, but you can see what's on them before printing. So that was one of my jobs. But yeah, it was a really fun experience, but definitely doesn't exist as much anymore today.
Yeah. I mean, with the advent of digital photography, that like kind of like probably made that industry go the way of like buggy whips. Like there are still some people that sell buggy whips. Like they're like multi-100-year-old companies that produce these buggy whips, and it could be that like 100 years from now there's still photo labs, but they're going to be probably very niche.
Yes.
And yeah,
very niche.
It's not like a giant industry anymore, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if that industry had undergone like a 90% reduction over the past 20 years.
For sure.
If not more. So, okay, so you're working in this photo lab, servicing professional, photographers, probably like wedding photographers, the people that do like yearbook. I don't know.
Yep.
Like who are the commercial? What are the jobs in photography? How did the photography industry work at the time?
From what I could tell, just from the people coming in, they were like commercial portrait photographers. They would do, newspaper and magazine photos. There were wedding photographers. And there were also some just like fine artists who would come in and they would have us print their photos for them. So it was kind of a range. I'm sure there were some like hobbyist photographers who were just kind of doing it for fun too.
Yeah. Did you have any inkling like, hey, I could do what they're doing and like go out and like make kind of like a consultancy out of this or like be a freelance photographer?
I don't know why. Well, I sort of tried. I did sort of second shooting for some wedding photographers, and I interned with one of the commercial photographers who came in, but for some reason it never really stuck with me in terms of, this is something I want to do. It just seemed like, I think I just didn't know how to even break into the field, and I didn't have enough of a maybe desire to be a photographer to do the research to figure out how to do the business side of things. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of like... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. There's a little bit of latency. Yeah, this is like an indictment of higher education. that you studied photography for like 4 years, and you still have like no idea how to actually like go out and make money as a photographer. And you're not even sure that you would want to, even if you knew how. But, college just kind of put you onto this track and they give you a big important major, and then there's so much momentum behind it and it's so hard to switch. But I mean, it does sound to me kind of like if I can like I'm probably over prescriptive and hand wavy, but it sounds like you said you didn't have a big interesting social life when you were younger. You go to college is where a lot of people, if you're fortunate enough to go to college, like their social life kind of burgeons and the whole world opens up, right? It's not just like high school never ends type, cliquey things. It's like real people kind of like becoming friends and around common interests and stuff like that. And a lot of that kind of like high school nonsense kind of like breaks down to an extent. Like once you get out of like fraternity sorority spheres and stuff. And I'm not trying to like knock those or anything, but like I was never in a fraternity and like I didn't have a lot of respect for like the fraternities and stuff. Like we always kind of looked askance at them, if that's how you pronounce the word. Like, like that's like we're here to learn, like I kind of like elevated myself above like the people doing like, drinking excessively and stuff like that. So, but it sounds like you had kind of like a social awakening in college. And then maybe the fact that that was all happening distracted you from academics to an extent. And
I'd say so, yeah.
When the professor was like, "Oh, you should consider being an artist," or "Why don't you switch to art?" You're like, "Sure." It doesn't sound like there was like a ton of deliberation and like long-term planning during those 4 years. Would you agree with that sentiment? I don't want to mischaracterize it.
No, I would definitely agree. I think I just didn't know what was possible. So you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't really understand how I needed to think about trying to find a career or choosing which one I wanted to do. So I think it was, a lot of fumbling and just not really knowing what I wanted in life, I think, back then.
But you're in Boston, this very expensive city, very, prestigious city. Like, that's where, like, Harvard is, MIT. There's so many, like, big, important companies based out of Boston. There's so much research being done there. It's like a really important, and it's one of the oldest cities in the United States, so it's got, like, this very long, storied history. And you're just kind of working at a photo lab. And, like, did you feel, like, ambition going to and from work every day? Like, at what point did the more ambitious Jessica Chan start to materialize, the one that we all know and respect today?
I think it took a while. I think I really just didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in my 20s. So I think it wasn't really until I started working at this small web dev shop in Boston that I was thinking, I can like sort of stay here and learn how to program. They were doing like sort of back-end like database work. That's kind of where I started.
Yeah. How did you get that job?
So as you probably saw in my like YouTube video, I did a lot of temp office jobs for, I would say, a few years. So this is just, like, it was fine work, but it wasn't something that I necessarily felt passionate about. But I was looking for a job at one point because my like temp work had ended or whatever, and I looked on Craigslist for just random jobs, and I was like, I could probably do data entry because that was one of the things that I'd done at my temp jobs. So I found this data entry position in Boston, and it ended up being at this small web dev shop, and I got the job there, started out doing data entry, but then they ended up teaching me like SQL database work and doing .NET programming and Microsoft Access, for those of you who remember. So yeah, that was kind of like my entrance into like the world of web development. Even though I had taught myself how to build websites when I was younger, it was always just something I did for fun, and it just never clicked in my brain that this is something that people can get a job in and also make like really good money. So for some reason, it just took me falling into that job and realizing like, I have these like skills that I can develop and then use to apply for, actual web development jobs. Because the job that I got from Craigslist was like very contract, like temporary stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like destiny's way of like, repeatedly like shoving you in this direction.
Yeah.
So you're starting to learn these skills. How do you go about learning this giant corpus of knowledge? It sounds like you already knew a little bit about, Microsoft Access, database tool that comes with Microsoft Office, like the PowerPoint. Everybody knows how to use PowerPoint. Everybody knows how to use Excel and Word, but not as many people know how to use Access because, the learning curve is a little bit steeper. But it sounds like you were learning relevant tech skills just on the job, and you were being pushed in this more technical direction. Like, do you remember a clear point where somebody entrusted you with actually building something? Do you remember what your first project was?
I mean, I started out, and I think this is what I think people realize when you get your first job in programming or web development or whatever, is that you're not necessarily going to be tasked with building this entire giant project from scratch. Most likely you're going to be given tasks to do in existing projects that the company already has had running. So that's what I did. So I had to work on this website, and I had to, for example, add or subtract drop-down menu items. So I had to learn how to do that. So it was very like task by task based, or I had to learn how to make changes to the websites that I needed with CSS, or just like learning how to run reports and write reports in SQL to get data from one of their clients. So it was very much like, I need to do this thing because my boss told me to. If I don't know how to do it, I need to figure it out.
Yeah, so essentially you had the benefit of having somebody tell you what to do and give you these missions. And then each mission was like a growth opportunity. And how did you figure stuff out? Like, because again, you have no formal programming training.
Yeah.
You are a hobbyist, like web designer, I guess. and you have very rudimentary skills probably, but you do have the benefit of kind of like a sense of aesthetics. You have like an eye from photography and from taking art classes and stuff like that. Maybe you could talk about like your ascent as far as like gaining more confidence in your abilities as you ran these kind of like fetch quests for your boss.
Yeah. I think like looking back, I honestly really lucked out with that job. It paid pretty terribly, and also like I wasn't paid for 8 hours a day. I was only paid for like the actual tasks that they could bill to their clients. So depending on how busy they were, I might only have like 30 minutes or like a couple of hours a day. But what I did learn was how to learn or how to find solutions to things, because my boss would explain one time how to do something, like how to, run a SQL query and how to write it. And then I would have to do the same thing for a similar task. And he got very grumpy if I had to ask him to explain something to me more than once. So he actually would give me, and I think there were a couple other people working there at the time. We all had notebooks that we had to leave at the office, and we had to take notes. So if he would explain something, I would write it down, how to do it. And then if I had to do the same task in the future, I could just refer back to my notebook and be like, oh, this is how to do it. And then if you do that 5 or 10 times, eventually you learn how to do it without having to refer to your notes. So that process times, 100 or however many times, I just learned everything kind of piecemeal, which was one way to learn. I think it worked out for me because you learn real skills, applicable skills like right away. I didn't learn things from a class and then have to figure out how that works in the real world later on. So it was an interesting way to learn. I'm not sure if that way exists as much anymore because this is back before coding boot camps existed. So in some ways, timing wise, I really was fortunate in terms of being able to find this job and also use my skills to land another junior dev job a couple of years later. So I think the world has just changed a lot from that. But, that's how it was for me.
I mean, what you described doesn't sound unlike what like a blacksmith might do to like an apprentice thousands of years ago, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe hundreds of years ago. Whereas like, I already showed you how to do this. Like almost kind of like a cartoon. Like if you've ever seen the old Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, the cigar chomping boss with like the buzz cut, and he's sitting back in his, he's like, Parker, I told you to do this, this, and this. Kind of like very, I guess he has very high standards for you and what you're going to get done, right?
Very much trial by fire.
Yeah, and that trial by fire, man, the lawn mowing is really intensifying. Again, I apologize if anybody hears like, what sounds like a helicopter landing.
It's very faint.
Okay, good. Thank you for reassuring me that. As I'm very openly say, like at Free Code Camp, we don't do editing of these podcasts. Like this is unfiltered, like unfolding in real time, right? And for me, that's like exciting. It's exciting that there are a bunch of men with hoodies and leaf blowers outside my window, like playing a part of this recording. It sounds like you learned a ton from that opportunity, even though it was probably like it was like a certain window of time when it was like the Wild West in programming and technology, and there wasn't really the expectation maybe that somebody would have formally studied programming and computer science, or if they studied that, they probably studied a bunch of applied mathematics. They didn't study how to build websites and how to do and a lot of these technologies were kind of being invented on the fly during that era. So you don't necessarily have comprehensive textbooks. Maybe you go to like a Barnes and Noble or a Borders and you get like did you ever get like the big fat books like on different technologies? Like, like
I have quite a few that I actually need to donate because I don't read them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you remember that era of just going into a big bookstore and just be like, wow, like so much knowledge.
All this knowledge is right here.
Yeah.
I just need to buy this book.
And then there was like a CD-ROM in the back.
Oh yeah, of course. Yep, in the plastic sleeve.
Yeah, very cool. Well, so it sounds like you learned a tremendous amount there, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about what transpired, because it sounds like you were kind of going through the proverbial learning process, but you were doing it in a way that most people don't do it, because most people nowadays in 2024 like just use FreeCodeCamp to learn, or they use some combination of courses like the courses you've developed, or video based courses, or they may use some books still to learn different technologies. Like everybody learns a little bit different, but to actually be in a shop with other devs, almost like I think of it as like I keep coming back to like a newsroom feel, because it does feel like an editor just sending you out, like giving you assignments. And I worked in newspapers for a while, and that was very much what it was like. It was extremely hands off, and you just like learn from your peers. You learn from reading the New York Times every day and seeing what they were doing. Were you going to like Coca-Cola's website and like looking at their like interaction design and stuff like that and trying to learn from it, or were you studying a lot of work that was out in the wild?
To be honest, I didn't, because I was so overwhelmed with the work I had to do for my job during the day. And this is more like after I left that sort of temp job and was able to work at an advertising agency. Like that was like drinking from a fire hose in terms of I just had to like change this button on this landing page, but like I knew that I had to get it done like in less than a day or a few hours, because I need to meet my deadline. So like it was. I would say that the first 3 years, the first 1 to 2 years were incredibly stressful, because I constantly felt like I was going to fail and they were going to fire me for incompetence. So it was a lot of Googling. It was a lot of like looking up at Stack Overflow, trying to do as much research on my own before I actually asked one of the other developers, because I was also very afraid of annoying the other developers if I bugged them too much with questions. So it was like, I would say it was pretty difficult for me at that time, but I was learning so much. Like I think my brain was just like expanding with the amount of things I would learn, because like every day I would have to learn, five new things, and then you multiply that by all the days in the year, and like by the end of the first year I had learned like so much just from having to do all these like innumerable little tasks. Yeah. It was, so yeah, I didn't have free time to try to build my skills, because I was learning so much like on the job.
Yeah, interesting. So like, would you just go home and be like exhausted, like collapse in your bed? Like, because learning is so hard and it's so taxing.
Hard.
Like I spend a lot of my time learning, and not to make it about me again, but like there are days at the end of the day, my brain is so tired. It's like mush, because I've spent the entire day like studying really hard on different topics and stuff. Like for me, like the greatest feeling in the world, the thing that I optimize and I build my life around, obviously like rearing my kids and stuff like that, and making a living and running FreeCodeCamp. But like in my free time, I spend as much time as possible reading, listening to podcasts, studying world languages, of course, shedding on the bass, woodshedding. Charlie Parker famously goes to a woodshed and just gets better by just practicing every day in the woodshed, and like putting on records and learning from. Anyway, sorry, like go off on a music tangent. I'm obsessed with music, but it sounds like your brain was kind of like expanding, and you were probably, I imagine, again, I don't want to talk too much about what was theoretically going on in your brain, but I imagine like there were more wrinkles getting like formed in there, and you were like, did you feel yourself becoming more powerful and more capable with every day? Was there a sense of forward momentum?
I think the first year was more just like living in complete abject fear of losing my job. So I think it took, I would say, 2 years. I think by the end of my second year at the agency, I was like, okay, I think I'm like starting to feel less panic and more like I realize I'm still at the early stage of the learning curve, but it doesn't feel as difficult and impossible as it did in the first year. So it's a long time, but like I think the 2-year mark was really where I was starting to feel a little bit more comfortable with, and even if I didn't know an answer right away, I knew that I had the tools to look up and figure out the solution. And I think that when I hit that point, I was like, okay, subjectively, or objectively, I can do pretty much anything that someone asks me. I just need to have enough time to do the research and do trial and error. So it was up to that point, it was very hard. But after that point, I knew I was still a beginner, but I felt more confident in my own ability to research and gain, the knowledge I needed to, do my job.
So one of the takeaways I'm getting is as much as you were learning and gaining competency, it was not a fun experience because it sounds like imposter syndrome, the clinical diagnosis that every developer gets when they're learning the code, unless they learn the code when they're a little kid and they completely forget, all the trial and error and stuff. It sounds like that was completely casting a shadow over all the enjoyment. So this was a rough year of your life, it sounds like.
It was rough. Yeah. And I think personally, I also don't like feeling incompetent. So I think that also made it even more difficult for me to not just be fearful and stressed the entire time. So, maybe other people, if you're more comfortable, not knowing everything, then maybe it would be a little easier for you. But I think I just put a lot of pressure on myself. And I think that definitely contributed to how hard that first year was. I was very grumpy.
Yeah. I guess that was my one thing, saving grace when I was trying to learn to code over this very lengthy process, looking like a total amateur on stage at these hackathons presenting, having my code crash or just there was this one time that I went out to a hackathon and I couldn't actually get the project to work. The whole team was counting on me and we just showed a slideshow instead of showing a working prototype. And that was probably the lowest point in my coding journey, just having let down my team. But the one thing that I think made it a little bit more bearable is I've always been kind of I've never thought I was a particularly smart or interesting or capable person. I always kind of looked at myself as kind of just not a serious human being. And Socrates, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. And I always kind of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the fact that they're these happy-go-lucky kind of fools, just stumbling into these very important matters and stuff like that. I always kind of looked at myself that way, and that cushioned kind of the imposter syndrome. Of course I'm an imposter. I'm not that smart of a guy, So it sounds like you were holding yourself to a higher standard than I was, and that might have been part of the reason for the misery.
100%.
But you did power through it, right? You stayed at this job for 7 years, right? At the agency? Mm-hmm. That's a long time to be at a first job. But it's commendable because the saying, a rolling stone gathers no moss. You were gathering tons of moss, just chilling there, right? And you want to get moss. You want to get character.
It's very mossy.
Right? You want to be an organic, because rock by itself is not organic, right? Or maybe some types of rock are sedimentary. I don't know. But, you were building out this character and this persona as a developer and kind of coming into your own. Can you talk about those other 6 years at the agency once you'd kind of gotten through the first kind of hell year?
Yeah. So I would say, I think I also got promoted twice in my time there. And obviously companies are completely relative. Everyone sort of has a different idea of what senior means and all that stuff. But I started out as an assistant web developer, so junior level. And then I think after 2 years, I got promoted to just web developer. So in the middle. And then I think year 4, I got promoted to senior web developer. Again, it doesn't mean I could be a senior at Google or Facebook or whatever. But I think that sort of it shows that I was able to progress in my career, and the agency felt like I was, contributing more and more the longer that I was there. So yeah, it definitely got easier over time, and I felt more confident and less stressed. And I sort of I had a lot of fun back in my agency days because, we all were, it's working together on these incredibly tight timelines and staying up late sometimes and stuff like that. And I don't know if I would want to do that again and have to stay up till 3 a.m. deploying something to production because a client needs it live exactly at that moment in time. But it was a fun time, and I did feel like because I was more confident in my skills, I was also able to take on bigger sort of scopes of work. So in the last, I would say, few years of my time at the agency, instead of doing these sort of piecemeal tasks like updating this button or, whatever, building this like one landing page, I would take on sort of full website builds, like from scratch. So, for example, one of our clients was a bank, and so I built their website, both back and front end. So I set up the CMS. We used Craft CMS, which is a C# CMS, and then I also did the front end. So I worked from the designer, and I did all the CSS and all that. So that was very satisfying to be able to reach that point where I could actually build a project from start to finish, like completely on my own. So I enjoyed that work a lot.
Yeah. That sounds like quite an evolution. So, very beginning, you don't know how to do anything. You're like struggling to you're referencing your notebook over and over that your boss has given you. You're scared to ask questions probably because he's created a culture of fear around asking questions. But
yep.
But by the end, you're like this kind of superhero that's just like, sure, I can learn, C#, Craft, new CMS I'd never heard of.
It's a great CMS.
I can do the front end, and I'm like soup to nuts, full stack dev, basically. That's got to be a powerful
I still had a
feeling.
notebook, I do have to say. I didn't have a physical notebook as much, but it was more like I would keep track of notes like online.
Yeah.
That's actually how the blogging thing started, because I started a blog spot just to write down the notes so I could quickly refer back to them based on the tags and stuff. So that's kind of how I started the developer blog thing. I was just making notes for myself.
Man, that is a blast from the past. So
I know, right?
There was this Blogspot and Blogger. They were the same, right?
They were the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
The domain was Blogspot, but it was called Blogger.
Great branding.
Yeah, it's very Google,
not
right?
Confuse anybody, right? So if you read this book, it's called The Founders at Work. Great classic book that every startup founder has to. Written by Jessica Livingston, YC, board member, Y Combinator board member. There's this amazing interview with Ev Williams, where he was running Blogger, and he had to fire everybody. They ran out of money at one point because he was such a bad, developer, like CEO.
Oh wow.
No shade to him, but he's not the greatest CEO on earth, right? As we've seen time and time again, right?
Yeah.
So then he went on to found Twitter and Medium and all these other websites. But yeah, man, like that is a harrowing tale. That's by far the best interview in the book. Is the tale of kind of ineptitude that led to Blogger almost being destroyed until Google swooped in and saved it at the 11th hour. But that's a cool website. So you started blogging on there just as a way to track your own learning. Like I just take notes and email them to myself, and then I search them in Google, right? Like they're personal. But you were actually you were learning in public, as Sean Wang likes to say. Like you were learning in public before it was the thing to do. You were kind of like one of the early adopters of just yeeting your learnings out into the stratosphere.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't trying to build an audience or whatever. This is kind of before everyone was trying to do that. It was really just, I wasn't expecting anyone to find my blog. And I don't think anyone public ever really discovered it because like it was just these random notes on like SQL and C# and CSS and stuff.
Yeah, but it got the kind of like technical writing, creative creator engine going, right? Like the Jessica Chan, the coder that we know today, is ultimately a consequence of you sharing your learning online, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, looking back, I think that Notes blog did help me sort of eventually choose the coder direction.
Yeah. So you're working at this agency. You've been there for 6 years. At what point did you start like seriously taking seriously the notion that like, hey, I could create tutorials on YouTube, or I could write blog posts that actually help people, like actually having an audience in mind rather than just yourself as your future self as the audience?
Yeah. So I would have to say this whole time, as I'd mentioned, like I just enjoyed setting up blogs just for fun. I also had this kind of like maybe entrepreneurial interest even from when I was a young kid. Like, I remember when I was young, I made this like vending machine out of a shoebox, and I tried to sell it to my siblings, and like I would just put like random candy and like peanuts in it and trying to make money off of them. So I feel like I always was interested in not necessarily like making a lot of money and getting rich, but again, kind of creating this entity that worked in terms of operating as a business and letting me be autonomous, which is a huge sort of core desire of mine. Like, I really like the idea of kind of being independent and not having to be dependent on, say, a company or whatever for my livelihood. So I think, you know, when you're working at a company, I think there's good and there's bad, and I think I saw both of those in my time at the agency. We had, I think, maybe 1 or 2 layoffs, and those are incredibly demoralizing for the people who are laid off, obviously, but also the people who are left. And it kind of really hits home that the company's not there to like help you. Like, the company's there to exist as its own, and it's kind of being built on the backs of the people working there every day. So I think maybe with a little bit of disillusionment, I would say, with the whole like getting a corporate job and they'll take care of you and give you benefits, yada yada, which was very good. But I think,
and that may have been how it was back in the day
then,
when there was like zero competition, like nobody went to college, and if you served in the war, that was probably good enough for you to be able to be like an executive in an advertising agency. If you've seen Mad Men, like they always make fun of the college kids because they went to war when the college kids just went and like lived these yuppie lifestyles and stuff. But like things used to be a lot less competitive. People would just drink martinis all day, and like it was I mean, like things have gotten so incredibly intensely competitive over the last 30 or 40 years, and I don't think
it's very cutthroat.
Older folks understand. Frankly, there's like a lack of empathy from like, a lot of older folks. I don't want to say all older folks. There are definitely, people from previous, like people in their 70s and 80s that do understand how hard young people have it. But it has gotten so intensely competitive that any kind of like social contract between an employer and an employee that may used to exist when you were like an IBM man or something like that, right? That is long gone, right? Like there's nobody that can't be fired, basically, unless you're Mark Zuckerberg and you have like ironclad control of like the preferred shares, and nobody can fire you. Like he can't get fired, right? Travis Kalanick, in theory, couldn't have been fired from Uber. He also had like supermajority like shares and stuff. He ultimately stepped down because there was just so much pressure on him. If you watch Super Pumped on Netflix, great show about entrepreneurialism, not safe for kids.
I'll have to check it out.
It's a great show. I've talked about it before, and I do recommend Super Pumped with perhaps one of my favorite actors today, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He does a great job representing Travis Kalanick, the most Machiavellian business figure of our time. But what I'm just trying to get to is like anybody who says like we're a family, blah 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 blah, like like run the other way if your employer doesn't accept that there is, like you're a mercenary essentially, and you can really like working at the job, but at the same time, just know that companies ultimately have to respond to incentives from investors and other people like that, and like you're just one of many people. They don't like laying people off. I don't think anybody enjoys letting people go, but as you saw twice, just on the front lines, your colleagues getting let go, like that happens, and was that one of the reasons why you like ultimately wanted to get out of the proverbial rat race and like become independent?
I think eventually, but I think I also had sort of discovered the whole like idea of blogging as like a income source. I think this is back in the, I would say maybe 2010s or so. This is when blogging was like really, I would say, at its peak, with like you could make money off of like affiliate links and all this kind of stuff. And so I think since I loved blogging, I was like, oh, this could be something that I could do. And I think I was kind of searching for a way that I could make money on my own without having to be dependent on a company. And I'd read this book called The $100 Startup by Chris Guillebeau. And I remember this is how Coder started. So like I was on a flight to Japan to visit my friend, and I was reading this startup book on the plane. And Chris Gillibo asks you, like, okay, to figure out what business idea you can come up with, like, what are you passionate about, and what can you do to help other people? And so for me, I was like, oh, I would say I'm passionate about coding. I really enjoy building websites, and I think it's a skill that I could, share with other people and help them to basically do what I did, because, coding took me from working these temporary office gigs to having like a very stable, like well-paying career. And so I felt like that moment of realization of like, oh, I should do this. Like, I want to do this. And so that's kind of how I started like getting more serious about writing coding tutorials on my blog. And then I also got into Instagram. I found out there was like a whole developer community on Instagram, which was like really cool because in my job, like my coworkers were great, but like I only had worked with like male coworkers. Like there were no other women like at my job the entire time that I worked there. So seeing on Instagram that there were like, other people doing web development who, looked more like me was like a really cool sense of community. And so I kind of like fell into like those sort of areas in terms of like online, web dev type of stuff. So yeah, that's how Coder started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, I mean, you brought up an important point about the fact that like the field was very male dominated at the time, and so just to finish kind of like the origin story, and establish our chronology that we're going to be drawing from for the rest of the conversation. So you did leave this job at the agency, and was that to ultimately go into freelancing yourself?
Yeah, so I left the agency because I was trying to do freelance and sort of build up like the coder thing. So I did end up freelancing for the agency for a little bit even after I left. But I think it was just nice to, have less of these sort of expectations and everything. But yeah, so I did freelance for, I would say a long time, maybe like 3 or 4 years. And then I did freelancing for like another company as well. Yeah. Before I quit that a couple years ago.
So you were able to kind of like taper off having people go out and find clients for you. Essentially, that's what like an agency does. It kind of like puts under one roof like both the sales side and the actual like, I guess, production side. That's probably an oversimplification. I've never worked at an agency. I have people that swear by working at agencies that love agency life, like Cass Moreno, CSS artist, whom you can watch an interview with here on the FreeCodeCamp YouTube channel, or on the listen. You can listen on the FreeCodeCamp podcast. She's amazing. But I'm really interested in kind of like how you tapered that off and how you went out and got your own clients, because that is something that a lot of people listening to this would like to ultimately freelance and have their own kind of consultancy.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I never was like having to find my own clients because my clients were companies, if that makes sense. So like my first client was obviously my old agency, and then just through knowing coworkers who moved on to other companies, like they were hiring freelancers as well. So I was doing freelance jobs for like their new companies and stuff like that. So I never did the whole like, local, like try to find, local businesses to build up your clientele. But I do know that's very possible.
That's such an interesting departure from what a lot of the other people who do freelance online. So essentially you built like this network from working in an agency for so long that you already had like kind of all the connective tissue you needed to be able to just continue to coast on those relationships.
Yeah, for sure. I think I had I'm very fortunate that I benefited from my networking back then, and just able to find different freelance gigs. And
the entire time you're blogging, and as you said, in the early 2010s, blogging was at its heyday. You could slap AdSense on a blog or potentially get like sponsorships or do other things like that, and you could actually make real money blogging. Now, can you make real money blogging? Well, I am going to tell you how much money FreeCodeCamp's publication makes, right? We do millions of page views a month. on that, and we just have like Google AdSense running, and I think we make like maybe like 10 or 15K a month from like the ads that show on there. It's not a lot of money when you consider like the entire staff.
Millions of,
and like we have an editorial team. We have a ton of volunteer contributors who write their excellent tutorials and publish up there. I publish my entire book. If you Google Learn to Code book, it's free.
Yeah.
It's all on freeCodeCamp.org's news. That's our publication. And we publish tons of tutorials there every week. We probably publish like 20 tutorials a week, and including a lot of full-length books and handbooks. We've got more than 100 books through FreeCodeCamp Press, which is really just us publishing through our CMS. But like there's no way that I was like an individual author trying to live off AdSense that I'd be able to. Right? We've got like all this momentum from SEO and like just being around and like having a reputation, and everything we do, FreeCodeCamp kind of like feeds into like people knowing that FreeCodeCamp exists. I wear the FreeCodeCamp shirt literally everywhere I go. You know, it's like part of. I've got like 10 of these that I just wear them every day. It's my uniform. I got to be a billboard for this charity, right? So you know, 15K. I don't imagine you were making even close to 15K off just ad revenue. But like maybe you could talk about how you were able to gradually become more of a content creator and less of a freelancer.
Yeah. So I think it grew, I would say, pretty slowly. So like initially I had the blog, and I don't know if I even put ads on the blog initially. I think the only way I was making money was Amazon affiliate links. And it was doing okay, but it wasn't like,
yeah, I mean, when you say okay, if you wouldn't mind giving like, could you tell us?
If I can remember, I would say maybe like, I would say $200 a month would be pretty good.
Oh wow! Okay, so that's from Amazon affiliate links, like
yeah.
And now, if you try to do Amazon affiliate links, I think I've heard it's a lot less. Like they
really
don't care about the affiliate market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the landscape in terms of online like money making has definitely changed. You cannot live off of ads and affiliate links alone. You need other diversified channels of income for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your like, I guess, revenue stack, if you will? Like how were you able to to make it work?
Yeah, so I think things changed a lot when I decided to go into YouTube and not just writing text tutorials, but like, doing these screencasts and other things. And so that started it had like stops and starts. So I think the first YouTube video was uploaded in like 2017, and then I didn't upload another video for like a year or 2 years. But I did eventually start being more consistent about uploading videos, and things started taking off in 2020. Like, I think when the pandemic hit, everyone was just like online 24/7. So like back then there were a lot of people watching YouTube videos. So that was kind of when my channel started growing a lot, and I was able to make money off of AdSense. I think maybe since then, maybe the max that I would do was like $1,500 a month from just AdSense, which was pretty good. And then I also had some affiliate links, and that was bringing in about the same per month.
Okay, so
yeah.
You're making about $3,000 a month just as a creator, and you're still doing consulting work at this point,
yes.
or were you?
I was doing freelancing, and then at some point I was like, I think when I hit that 3K a month mark, I was like, all right, let's like just try to do coder and not do freelance anymore. So I stopped doing freelance, I would say maybe 2022, just like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and to put this in context, like for a lot of people listening to this, they may be single or not like married, or maybe in a situation where they are not able to get health insurance. Your husband is an accomplished animator. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about him and like the role he played in you being able to make this transition, because my wife was absolutely instrumental in me being able to make the transition. She was working, in tech, doing accounting, and we had health insurance. She wasn't making just a ton of money because she wasn't a developer. She was like doing accounting and stuff, which is like half, a quarter, a tenth of what developers make. But
Yeah.
but that insurance was very helpful, and also the fact that we just had like a consistent baseline, like the rent was basically covered just from our income and stuff.
Nice.
So that gave me the flexibility to take more risks. If I were a
Yeah.
single person and I didn't have and I also had like a lot of savings, and I've famously plowed like $150,000 of my own savings in a free code camp, and that was money that I earned over like 10 years working as a teacher. Basically, like you can imagine
wow.
what a teacher. I basically saved half of everything I earned, and I also like hustled. Back in the day, like you hear about this all the time, and I'm not sure if you can even make money on it anymore. But I would like buy tons of old like video games and stuff that like
Oh, cool.
collectibles, things like that on
Yeah.
Craigslist. Go to like, buy big lots of these things, and then I break them down and sell them, kind of piece them out on eBay and sell them that way. And that's how
That's
I
awesome.
built like the small fortune, $150,000 that I used to fund develop like the first few years of Free Code Camp before we got our tax exempt status. But the entire
That's really
time,
cool.
of course, we also had my wife's income. So it just so I always like to point out, like, your situation, your circumstances are going to be different from mine and Jessica. So just factor that in. Your mileage may
For
vary.
sure.
And also factor that in when you hear these get rich quick schemer type people or like these like the hustle culture bros, people like that, right? Like there is risk in trying to become a creator. There is risk in trying to become a freelancer. There's risk in taking time off to like learn to code in hopes of getting a developer job. And I think people are remiss when they don't acknowledge that risk. But anyway, sorry, with that sidebar, your husband.
Yeah, so my husband actually is also a freelancer. So unfortunately, we are paying out of pocket for private health insurance, and it's like very expensive. I think I remember I had a friend who I was talking to who lives in Canada, and I was talking about how we have to pay for our own health insurance. She's like, "Oh, like how much is it?" I was like, it's like $1,000 a month for like two people. And she was like, "What?" Because like she was like, "I'm complaining about spending $50 a month on my Canadian health insurance." So like that was just like a huge like, I think eye-opening moment for yeah. So it's very expensive in America to pay for insurance yourself, but I think we make it work because we do have savings, and we also live in kind of a lower cost of what's it called? Cost of living,
Lower cost of
living part of the country. So that helps too. Because if you want to live in like LA or New York or wherever, it's like, I think there's definitely obviously benefits to that, and there's a reason why so many people want to live there. But I remember reading about Chris Coyier from CSS Tricks and finding out that he lives like up in Wisconsin or something, and I think that was, for me at least, a realization of like, oh, you can like still have a really big online presence and be a part of the whole community, but you don't have to live in like these big name cities. So I think that
a lot of those
helps.
heavies, as I like to call them in the teaching space, Chris Coyier, of course, great dude whom we hope to have on the podcast at some point. West Boss, Scott Stalinsky, like a lot of the kind of like the people that preceded me, like whom I looked up to and learned from very early on, and probably you and like a lot of other people also look up to and learn from them. They live out in the middle of nowhere. And like,
I love that.
Yeah. And so you don't have to live in SF. It absolutely helps. And I did live in SF during the early first few years of Free Code Camp, SF San Francisco. I moved out there because that's the tech mecca. And for me, it wasn't that big a deal because I was already living in like Southern California. So I just went up there and slept on my friend's couch for a few months. And then I eventually my wife was able to transfer within her company up there, and we were able to make it work in SF.
Nice.
But we were living in a one-bedroom shoebox. It's like 600 square feet, and we were paying like a ton of money to live there. And so, it's definitely, for me, it was a phase. It was like a stage. If you look at like a rocket, how there's like the booster stage. That was the booster stage. And now, like, we're a little higher up. We don't need as much fuel to like keep ascending or something like that. I don't know. It's a weird analogy, but it sounds like you and your husband. And by the way, I also get like Obamacare. Like I pay from the private market as well, and like most people I know do, unless they're at like some big company that has like fancy health insurance. And if you're getting health insurance, you're paying for it some way, right? Like you're probably getting a lower, compensation in some other form because that benefit. Employees are sophisticated. They look at you as the total cost of having this person fill this cubicle seat, right? They're not unsophisticated, and they're not charities, right? Like FreeCodeCamp is literally a charity, but its purpose is not to be charitable to the people that work at FreeCodeCamp.
Yeah.
It's to serve a charitable purpose, which our mission, our charitable tax-exempt purpose from the IRS to create free learning resources like this podcast you're watching right now.
Right.
And I'll just, while I'm ranting about FreeCodeCamp, I'll just say you can become one of the 9 million plus, or 9 million, sorry, I wish it was 9 million, 9,000 plus, I think it's like 9,003. We just crossed 9,000 recently.
Congrats.
People who support FreeCodeCamp each month with a small donation of like $5 a month or something like that. You go to freeCodeCamp.org/donate. You make all this possible. The courses, the interactive learning platform, the text-based tutorials, the books, everything. So shout out to all those kind folks. And if you're watching, thank you. Or if you're listening. I always listen to the audio version. I don't actually watch the video version, but like we have a lot of people that watch the video, so they get to look at like the cool video I put on in the background, so that people don't just have to look at my face for 2 hours. They can look at like a tracked mode of some old Japanese arcade game from the 80s. Okay,
Nice.
So back to like just day-to-day living as a freelancer. So your husband is no stranger to freelancer life. He is doing animation.
Mm-hmm.
His animation is amazing. I don't know if he also does the sound design, but like just like the
Yeah,
ear
you can
candy.
do
'Cause-
anything.
yeah, and like, so again, I'm going to link to that one video about your coding journey, which what we just talked about at length over the last hour. You can like learn all that in 6 minutes with really cool Pokemon kind of Earthbound looking animations and stuff. By the way, I was like watching that video and I was like, I hadn't seen it in like 4 years since you first published it, and last night I watched it, and I showed it to my kids back in the day. But like I left this really lengthy comment on YouTube. Like anybody who leaves comments on YouTube, if you ever feel like, man, YouTube just like, did anybody even see my comment? I don't think anybody saw this comment. You saw it. You like put like the heart thing, which you can do if you're the creator of the video, but like it had one thumbs up, and that was probably you. I like spent probably like 5 minutes coming up with this really complimentary comment. And, like, I think Brad Traversy, who runs Traversy Media, he's jumped in, he's like, great video, and it had like 2,000 upvotes, and like so I genuinely believe that YouTube is like heavily biased toward people who leave comments within the first few minutes. Those are the ones that people are going to like, and those are the comments that are going to rise to the top. So if anybody ever leaves a video and you feel neglected, or if you ever leave a comment on a video and you feel neglected, know that I'm right there with you, and that I feel robbed by YouTube's comment algorithm. I spent so much time coming up, like 5 minutes of my life, coming up with that comment, and nobody saw it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Definitely heavily weighted toward the early stuff.
Yeah. So you've got approximately $3,000 a month in income, and you're paying $1,000 of that just to private insurance and stuff like that. But like, where do you go from there, and how do you build out this Coder brand and this kind of like high touch, polished, like fancy animation, like really high energy? I mean, it's almost like you're definitely the highest production creator in the tutorial space, in my humble opinion.
Oh, thank
unless
you.
I'm missing, like I don't know anybody that like puts as much thought and deliberation into every minute of a video as you do.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of really great creators in this space, like Fireship, and there's like some new channels that are pretty good, like Hyperplex, a lot of animation stuff. But yeah, thank you. You're very kind. I will pass on the compliments to my husband. Yeah. So sorry, the question is like, how do I
how do things unfold from there? Like what are some of the main things you've learned creating these video tutorials?
I would actually say that, yes, I acknowledge I have a very unfair advantage in terms of being married to an incredibly talented animator and editor. But I would actually say that you can't just coast on like the sizzle. You do need to have like content. So I think I would actually say that one of the main maybe benefits of my videos that I really try to go in depth in the tutorials. So like I spend a lot of time when I'm writing scripts for the videos, writing a script, because I'm terrible ad-libbing. I've gotten better over time, but I like writing everything out, and I do a lot of research on I read the Mozilla Developer Network a lot. I also read the actual what is it, the HTML spec from the W3, and that is like bedtime reading. It's like incredibly dense and hard to pick out the meaning, but I do it when I have to. So I would say that I try really hard to do a lot of in-depth research, but also present that in-depth information in a way that is accessible to people who are not, experts in the field, because I think that's really important to be able to talk to people at the level that they're at and sort of guide them through their own learning journey. So I would say that's the most important thing that I try to do in all my videos.
So research and preparation. So by the time you turn on the camera or turn on the mics, you've already spent a great deal of time thinking about the topic that you're going to talk about. And and it shows. It comes through in your videos that you're pretty authoritative and you're pretty definitive. And also it's just really compressed. Like you said, Fireship is famous for having these 3-minute videos that are funny and just overload of memes and stuff like that. And like C# in 3 minutes or something like that, right? Like those kinds of videos. Those are cool. Those are fun. And then you have the polar opposite where these long winding conversations between two people who have done stuff, over here on the Free Code Camp podcast, right? So zero production value, just personality.
Yeah, some good content.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I listen to so many people. I interviewed Scott
Selinsky?
Not Scott Selinsky. Scott, the other prominent Scott Hanselman. Yes.
From
and
Microsoft,
he was how do you do it? Who listens to this stuff? Who has time to listen to it? But I listen to this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
I learned so much from long interviews. And I feel like they surface a whole lot of, interesting stuff that wouldn't come out in a polished, if you were to go on Good Morning America, which, it's you're lucky if they take 3 sentences of what you say and put it on there, right?
For sure.
I have so many questions for you. We haven't even gotten to them, and I'm just going to start firing them off.
Sure.
Right?
Let's go.
So you worked 7 years at your first job. Would you recommend people stay at their first job for 7 years?
I think if it works for you, I think if I stayed as long as I did because I felt like I was constantly learning and I didn't plateau, and I felt like it was a reasonably not toxic environment for the most part. And so I think it really depends on the situation, but I do think that it can be a benefit to start at one company and kind of, work your way up and get experience there. But yeah, varies.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a really cool background area. It looks like you got a nice bookshelf. You may actually have the same. It's not the same bookshelf. It's a similar bookshelf. I got it on Wayfair.
Yeah.
but you've got a cool kind of setup over there, and I imagine you're into mechanical keyboards and stuff like that. Just the aesthetics of getting work done.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as a more artistic minded person who is studied photography and probably Marie Kondo style thinks about all the different little details and stuff, right?
I try.
So maybe you could talk about your setup and how you get in your happy place for getting work done.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big question. I'm going to be completely honest here. So I've worked remotely for the past 7 years. Some of it was at the agency where I actually worked remotely, and I started out working in the physical office. But motivation has been a huge, I cannot overestimate how much of a struggle staying motivated has been, working remotely, and then also just working for myself essentially. I'm still figuring it out, but I'm very embarrassed about the thought of what I do with my day. You've seen those videos where it's day in the life of a programmer, and you see all the things that they do. That's everyone's waking up at 6 a.m. and stuff. It's I do not wake up at 6 a.m. My sleep schedules can swing widely. And I'm definitely not sit down at the desk for 8 hours and type away. So it's like, it's been a pretty big struggle, if I'm honest. And I think, the whole pandemic was part of that too. I think, it just made things hard, but I'm hopefully getting better at motivating myself. But it's hard, man, especially when you're just at home all the time.
Yeah. When you have to turn it on, when you're like, man, I got this deadline, or I committed to this goal of mine. Maybe nobody else knows about it, but you want to hold yourself accountable. Like, how do you fire yourself up to get things done? Do you have any sort of ritual or some sort of fallback? Some sort of song that you put on that the Rocky theme, do 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 do
Yeah.
do, like something that you do to get
I wish that worked
on point
for me. I'm still figuring that part out, but I will say there's this guy on YouTube called Struthless. He's a tattoo artist, but he makes really cool videos on, a lot of them are like productivity and motivation and stuff like that, and just like artistic stuff. And he had this whole video on motivation, and he named something called the dark why. So it's this idea that when we think about motivation, we want to think I'm, it's like all good, it's all like positive stuff. But in reality, people are really motivated by either getting away from or proving something wrong, or avoiding these bad things that we don't want to happen. And I think that is true for me for sure. So for example, I've been working on this course for I don't know how many years now. It's been, again, a big struggle, but I think when I had a early access launch back in November last year, that was my drop dead deadline, where it's this has to be done before that point. Otherwise, I've already said it publicly what the launch date is. I'm going to hugely embarrass myself and also disappoint myself if I don't make that deadline. So once I had that external deadline, that really lit a fire under my butt and got me to just the finish line. So I think a lot of it is just figuring out how you operate and what things actually can motivate you.
Yeah.
But yeah, also not to sound cliched, but I think not letting myself scroll on Reddit all the time helped a lot. So just kind of limiting that social media phone time, I think helps your brain.
Yeah, 100%. I will second that. I don't spend any time on Reddit. In fact, Reddit timed me out as a mod for my own subreddit.
Oh no!
The R Free Code Camp. I'm in inactive status. It's this badge, and I'm the mod. I created the Free Code Camp subreddit, right? And they won't let me add Naomi from our team as a mod because I'm inactive. So I have to post on Reddit, and if you see me posting on Reddit, just say, "Hey, great job." So I mean it. I am impressed by the project you just submitted, but I'm also trying to get Reddit's algorithm to say okay, he's active again. He can add Naomi as a mod now. So but yeah, that the amount of time I spend on social media is vanishingly small, and it used to be this huge.
That's good.
Part I've definitely mellowed out not spending time there.
Yeah,
not that it's not incredibly useful.
Yeah,
but yeah. Sorry.
You've worked for yourself for a long time. How do you sort of stay motivated? Because it feels like you're working on 20 different amazing things at the same time.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it looks good from the outside, because every organization from the inside, every person's life, I think feels like it's probably a mess because you have access to all the gritty details. But I mean, one of our guests, Phoebe Vong Fidel, she talked about how having kids was the biggest productivity boon in her life, because suddenly she had to be accountable to the kid, and it took up so much of her time that she had to figure out how to structure the rest of her time so that she could be as productive as she was before she had kids. And that's a great interview. I recommend everybody check it out. But she learned she learned to code at 36 or something, right? And it was having that extrinsic pressure of I've got this kid that's constantly crying, and I need to get things done in between dealing with this kid. And I would say the first few years of Free Code Camp, I was just pure id. I don't know what to say, but it was just I really don't like for-profit education. I don't like student debt. I don't like it was kind of like a rage that was driving me.
That's your dark why.
Yeah, my dark why. I am so upset that we're in the most prosperous country in the world, and that there's suffering, that there's homelessness, that there are people who don't have access to opportunity just because of where they were born. If they were born in like Appalachia or, middle America, like where I grew up, and there just was an expectation that like you'd be a construction worker when you grew up or something like that, right? Like, I definitely, that was what fired me up initially, was just like wanting to destroy the for-profit education complex and make education free. Like I still feel that way, but I've mellowed out a lot, and a lot of my productivity is not based on emotion. It's based on like, okay, like I've got systems that keep me accountable. Like I wake up at 7 a.m. every day because I've got kids and they're like roosters and they jump out of bed at 7 a.m. full energy, and you're up when they're up, right? There's no sleeping through kids jumping on your bed and like, stealing your phone and watching like Zelda videos at full blast and stuff like that. So like that is kind of, and then just like all the normal diet, exercise. Like if you live in one place for long enough, and you establish some routines, you can kind of coast on those routines. Like today I woke up, took my kids to school, I went to the YMCA, I exercised, I walked home. The entire time I was thinking about this interview and like preparing, and I did my research. I had like 3 pages of notes. I was, questions I was going to ask. It's just a bunch of prep. And then that prep carries you, Sorry for that little like weird inhale thing. I'm not going to edit it out because I don't edit. Okay.
Keeping it real.
I feel like people need a source of like real human beings on the internet who are not fronting and maxing, who are just being themselves and not trying to impress people. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm trying to teach people and, potentially enlighten them about the nature of reality. It's not these perfect human beings. It's not like James Bond not getting killed the first time he goes on a mission because he's an ostentatious bastard, like he'd be the worst spy. The real spies you never even hear about, right? Anyway.
It's true.
So I want to draw some more insight out of you because you just have
Sure.
and I also want to be mindful of your time. So we have like 13 minutes. I'm just going to start firing away.
All right.
You're very vocal about how you look things up all the time. Like this is a huge part of your message to developers. It's like developers are not omniscient. They don't have like eidetic memories where they've just committed the MDN to their brain, right? You're constantly looking things up. And can you talk about that and like how did you feel weird about that when you were like, aren't developers supposed to be smart and just know this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was lucky that when I was starting out in my career, like I had other developers around me, and I think it seemed pretty accepted that everyone looked up stuff all the time. So I think that at least I didn't have any sort of like, false impressions of what a real developer does. But I noticed that when I started putting out some videos, I think early on I did these live coding live streams actually on my channel, and I would try to build a website from a design, which is my whole shtick, I guess. And I would spend a lot of time looking things up on Stack Overflow or reading the docs. And I just remember getting all these comments from people being like, oh my gosh, like real developers like do look up stuff. And so I think that really like sort of stuck with me, that if you're just learning how to code on your own and you don't have any knowledge about the industry, like it's very easy to think like, oh, these people on YouTube or professionals working at companies, like they don't have to look anything up. Like everything is just like living in their brain 24/7. And it's just like a library up there. But that's really not true because there's just so much knowledge. There's so many areas in programming and web development. And also things are changing all the time, especially nowadays. Things just change so quickly. So you have to, that's just part of the routine. So I think it's really important for me to like keep it real and just like show people like real web developers like look up stuff all the time.
Yeah. And it's not going to get any better. Like it's always going to be like that because by definition, the field is like people operating at the frontier of what the tools are capable of. If the tool abstracted something away, then you wouldn't need to do that anymore. So you're always going to be working with like higher and higher levels of abstraction probably, unless you have like really crazy constraints like we need this chip to work on this satellite and it needs to work for 2,000 years or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so those kind of edge cases aside, like you're going to be using lots of tools. You're going to be using the raw compute power and like all the other stuff that gets better every year. What kind of when you were developing websites and apps as a consultant, what were kind of your bread and butter types of elements and things that you just build over and over again?
That's a really good question. I I think like the whole like card UI, where it's like you have different cards with like photos and like things like that. And I think just when I was learning, there was no Flexbox initially, so you had to like lay out things with CSS Float, which was kind of a nightmare. But yeah, I think just like getting good at these sort of multi-column layouts that stack to one column on mobile, like that was, I would say, 90% of my job working in advertising and marketing.
Yeah. Were there any UI kind of dark patterns that you're like, I refuse to do this?
I mean, personally, I think carousels are just a huge waste of time, and they don't work because no one ever clicks to the second slide in the carousel. But carousels basically exist so that you can tell the marketing higher ups that the content they wanted to put on the homepage is on the homepage. It's just on slide 7. So I consider carousels a little bit of a pattern that I would not. I don't think
so
they do anything.
that's like an anti-pattern, but like a dark pattern, like something that you think is like manipulative of users, or maybe something that where there's like an ethical gray area.
Oh, like Adobe unsubscribing.
Or
things.
LinkedIn. The master of dark patterns. Like, hey, would you like to tell your friends that your friend's not on LinkedIn? Would you like to like import your inbox and every single person you've ever like emailed and like send them an email saying,
horrible.
hey, why aren't you on LinkedIn? They did that like 5 times. Like they said they'd do it once, and even the way they asked it was really sketchy. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to hammer on LinkedIn too much, but they did so many sketch things to build that out initially. But you said AI, Adobe like unsubscribe. But are there any dark patterns that you've like felt really bad about like implementing just because your boss told you to implement, or is there anything that, like an ethical line that you'll never cross again?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that I think I was never asked to do something that I felt ethically like questionable about. But yeah, I think anything that like leverages like your real life information or personal information, I think, for social credit or whatever on the app is like something that I think I would never want to do that. Anything that tries to get you to import your entire like contact list from your phone and give all your personal data to the app is like, I think, pretty bad.
Yeah, 100% agreed. So in terms of like gradually, you're somebody who focuses on expanding their skills all the time. In terms of strategies you've used to like learn things, like what is something that if somebody wanted to learn an entire new area, like let's say they're a front-end developer and they want to learn back-end so they can do full stack development, like are there any particular strategies or advice that you would give to somebody that wanted to absorb an entire new corpus of knowledge?
Yeah, I think if I was trying to learn something new in programming, I think I would definitely go to YouTube first. I would go to YouTube and see what videos are kind of the most popular. For example, a search term for like, XYZ for beginners. I think I would probably check out Reddit. I think Reddit is a good source of like real information from like real people, usually, especially for like learning. I think it's really good because there's always going to be someone posting like, I want to learn this and that. Like, how do I get started? And then people who are more ahead of you have like good recommendations, I feel like. So I think learning how to identify what a good resource is versus a not good resource, I think is kind of important.
Are there any like telltale signs of what is going to be like? My biggest concern is not necessarily the quality of the resource, but like how much of the resource you're going to get before they slam a paywall in your face and like, oh, I just spent like half an hour learning this tutorial and suddenly like I can't advance any further. You know? Like paywalls are really annoying. I understand that Codecademy and websites like that have to keep the lights on, but it's all, like sometimes I wonder if they're not sufficiently forthcoming about what the course actually includes for free before you have to start like inputting your credit card. But are there any just to rephrase my questions? This is a meandering thing. Are there any like telltale signs of like, hey, this is going to be too superficial? Like I shouldn't, because you can watch the same, C# in 3 minutes. Not to pick on, because he does it in jest. Fireship does like ingest how C# works in 3 minutes. There's not an expectation you're going to learn C# in 3 minutes, but like you can watch the same like HTML explained for beginners like 30-minute tutorial, like you could watch 20 of those and you wouldn't really be any better than if you just watched one or two of them, right? Like, how do you identify a good resource?
I personally, I sort of look at the tone of how the information is conveyed. So if someone starts the video like how to learn HTML and they're like, "What's up? Like, I'm here to show you," and it feels a little bit too like, there's like a certain energy that like sort of makes me naturally distrust the person. But so I feel like, and this is again just maybe my own personal preferences, but if I feel like the person teaching you something seems like they are more like serious or more, it seems like they've really put time into explaining things well, I think that's a good sign. I think also you can look at a channel, and this is just for YouTube resources, but you know, for example, Kevin Powell, all his videos are about CSS. They are incredibly in depth, and I think people kind of recognize that over time, and he explains things really well. And so I think that looking at sort of their body of work on their channel and seeing how, you know, either shallow or how in depth they go on the topics, I think if you do a little bit of research and just kind of see for yourself like how the teaching kind of sounds. So I think
whether they're talking authoritatively or it looks like they're reading a script that was probably generated by GPT or something like. And Kevin Powell, the king of CSS, he does not like it when I call him that, but that is like the moniker that he has. It
has been placed
given
on
by
his
the
head.
community. Yes.
Yeah.
Last question: what are some what do you think the biggest misconceptions people have about learning to code when they're just watching a bunch of YouTube videos? Like, what are some misconceptions that you want to just shoot down real quick to like reassure people? No, that's not how it really is.
I would say you don't have to be on the cutting edge. This might be an unpopular opinion, but it is my opinion. I don't operate on the cutting edge, and I don't think you need to. Excuse me. I think, like, especially when it comes to content creators in programming, like, you're trying to make a video that gets views, so people will always make videos on, like, the next, you know, new hottest technology out there or newest framework or whatever. But the reality is a lot of companies are using jQuery or they're using WordPress or, you know, they're not using, like, the newest CSS feature that's not, like, supported by, like, the majority of browsers. So I would say don't worry about learning the newest, hottest thing right now. I would say just stick to the basics, especially if you're at the beginning of your learning journey. And you can always learn newer things like later on. Because if you learn the new things now, they may or may not be hit the mainstream. And then you'll have, in some ways, maybe wasted some time that you could have spent just kind of focusing on the basics. So that's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great note to end on. Jessica, it's been such a blast learning more about you, learning from you. I've got like 160 lines of notes in my editor here. I've learned a tremendous amount, and it's just such an amazing blessing to have you in the developer community, creating tutorials, focusing on delivering substance for the people, right? And you know, we're all excited about your big course that you're working on. Best of luck continuing progress on that.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to emphasize, like, over the years, you've contributed so many tutorials to the FreeCodeCamp text-based, like, publication, got some video courses from you. Like, I am always really, really hyped up and really jazzed whenever Bo mentions, oh, yeah, I heard from Jessica. You know, so like, thank you for everything you're doing for the community.
Yeah, hopefully I can do more once this course is done with. But yeah, love the FreeCodeCamp community.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for just providing like a really cool, like, I guess, model of someone who has gone out and blazed their own path and who has transitioned from working in a field that, like, basically just cratered. I mean, you talk about, like, having to go work as a temp with a college degree. It's not a position that I did that too. I worked doing, like, their temp agencies in Oklahoma City, and I did that whole thing for a few years, and it was miserable. But being able to find a way out of that, being able to build up a skill set, being able to, you know, have a choice whether you want to do freelance work or continue to work for previous employers or work for your friends' new employers and stuff like that, or just continue to create content on your own. Like having that level of agency, that level of security, that being the master of your own destiny. I think it's incredibly inspiring, and I love how you don't sugarcoat any of this, and you don't seem to take any of this for granted. You're out there getting things done, and you're working just as hard as you were before. So it's a huge source of inspiration for me.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. Well, everybody, until next week, happy coding.